Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Dudes the Dead podcast, continuing our 2024 theme of looking at new horror movies. But before we get to today's new horror movie, we're going to do our quick cuts. Do you want to go first for your quick cut?
Indeed, I do.
All right. Curious to see what you got here.
Okay, so I think I've mentioned this a few times. I'm quite a big fan of Korean horror films. And this one, we haven't done an episode on this, I don't think, but correct me if I'm wrong. Have you seen I Saw the Devil?
I don't think so. I feel like you and I have talked about this one a few times.
It's a really good film. Anyway, so my quick cut is Exhuma 2024, directed by Jang Jae-hyun.
Oh, I've seen this one around. I haven't seen it, but
Yeah.
it caught my eye.
Exhuming an ancient grave has dreadful consequences. I think this is an outstanding film, kind of in the vein of The Wailing.
Yeah, The Wailing was really good.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's a longer runtime, which
And you
is,
still liked it?
and I still liked it.
Wow.
But the lead character, I won't even try to butcher his name, was the main villain in I Saw the Devil,
Okay.
and he's very, very good in these.
Korean horror is good.
Yeah, it's really good. And this one, what I like about a lot of the Asian horrors is how they approach or how they mingle ghosts and tradition and modern life, and how, somebody in modern times has kind of stepped on tradition or done something wrong or whatever. And
That does seem to be a recurring theme.
I think it's a favorite formula for Asian horror, but it also makes for a really good film in my viewing.
Is there much humor in it?
No,
No,
it's pretty
okay.
serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's worth watching. I streamed it on, well, it's either Netflix or Prime.
Okay.
I can't remember, but it's on there.
I've seen the cover and I've almost watched that one a few times, but I was hoping someone else would watch it and recommend it. So you recommend it then?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, quite good.
Good pick. All right. Well, my quick cut is also a 2024 film, and this is the first Omen, which I think you've seen as well, right?
I have.
Yep. So directed by Arkasha Stevenson and starring Nell Tiger Free and Ralph Ineson. A young American woman is sent to Rome to begin a life of service to the church, but encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of evil incarnate. I really like this
Did
one.
we see this together
No,
in theaters?
we
Oh,
saw it separately.
interesting. Okay.
I only watched it this morning.
Oh,
Yep. But I thought it was really good. Super dark.
yes.
Some really shocking graphic scenes, which I wasn't quite prepared for. I was like eating my breakfast and all of a sudden I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And I find oftentimes like the horror prequels don't always work out so well.
No.
But this one I thought was very effective and tied to the original Omen pretty well. Good performances. I like Ralph Ineson a lot.
Yeah, he's very good.
And the main lead, she was really good. And some really pretty disturbing, dark stuff going on in this film. Like the evil felt like palpable. And I like that in those films, those possession films. So it was a bit over the top at a few instances. I felt maybe it was too long, to borrow one of your critiques, where I was like,
What?
wow, this is going on for a while. But in totality, really good. And actually maybe one of the best 2024 horror films I've watched so far this year.
Wow.
I thought. You didn't like it as much, I think. You thought it was like so-so.
Yeah, I definitely didn't have as much praise for it as you do.
Do you know, were you in a bad mood or were you on your phone? Or I'm just curious because to me, that's the style of horror that you like as well. And you like The Omen. Did you have really high expectations or?
I think that was part of it. Because I had just watched The Omen a month or two ago in preparation for watching this one. You know what? I think it's a combination of, I've seen a few films along this trajectory.
Yep.
In the last couple of years, maybe even in the last year. And I don't know. I just felt like
the Catholic Church thing, or?
Well, yeah, I mean the whole possession thing, but even, and I
thing?
can't remember the name of the movie, but there was a film that came out in 2023, I think, but it wasn't, I think it flew by most people's radar, but that was the concept of the film, is that almost to a T, the church is grooming this young woman to deliver the Antichrist.
Right.
And it's all about her having to escape the clutches of the church.
Is it Immaculate? Because Immaculate's a bit like that too.
I don't think it is Immaculate. No, it's
No.
not. No, because Immaculate Conception. No, it wasn't that. It was a different one. But again, Immaculate's similar.
Sort of similar too, yeah.
And there've been other ones as well. And I guess for me, it was like, okay, I get the connection to the first Omen, and I did like that bit. So I liked that bit because I think the Omen is an important film in this genre. Yeah, I don't know. And it's well done. It's technically good. Performances are good. So it might be just an issue of a rewatch for me. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like just when you consider stuff like Exorcist Believer, like trying to go back and make these prequels to these classic horror films.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, oh wow, this one's actually like quite good. So,
and we've talked about this before. I mean, I think part of the challenge is the movies that you and I, well, I'll just speak for myself. The movies that I like and that I look up to, like The Exorcist and The Omen and Texas Chainsaw and whatever, part of the allure of those films is the atmosphere, the essence, that it's not about what's on the screen, but it's kind of like about the totality of everything that's going on. And we've commented before, like, you just couldn't make films like that anymore. How William Friedkin was as a director, you can't direct like that anymore. How the conditions of Texas Chainsaw, you can't do that anymore. So I think part of the allure of some of those original films is that sketchiness around creating the film, right?
Yeah. No, I hear you, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I feel like this one almost gets there and almost capturing that feel for me. But
yeah, it might be worth a rewatch. I mean, certainly it was a good film.
Yeah.
I just didn't have as much praise for it as you did. But yeah, it could just be a one-off, right?
Yeah. All right. So that wraps up our quick cuts. Moving on to our main feature. And that is In a Violent Nature. This was directed by Chris Nash, starring Rye Barrett as Johnny and Andrea Pavlovic as Chris. This is a 5.7 on Internet Movie Database and a 77% critic score, but only a 44% audience score. I think that makes sense to me when I think about it, but definitely disconnect there again between the critic score and the audience score, something you commented that we're seeing as a bit of a theme this year. So the premise is when a locket is removed from a collapsed fire tower in the woods that entombs the rotting corpse of Johnny, a vengeful spirit spurred on by a horrific 60-year-old crime, his body is resurrected and becomes hell-bent on retrieving it. And of course, the big twist here is that unlike every other slasher film where the viewer is situated with the victims, in this case, the viewer is situated with the killer. And you are essentially along for this ride, hovering behind the shoulders of a serial killer who is kind of wandering the woods. And so you experienced it from a very different perspective. So what was your reaction or take to this approach to a slasher film?
Well, would you say this is new? Like, this reminded me of a Friday the 13th.
Except I feel like in all of those, like in Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, you are situated, like the protagonists are the teenagers, right? You're not following Jason around the entire movie.
No, not typically, but aren't there a couple of Friday the 13th where they take his POV, like where we're
For the whole film?
Yeah, maybe not.
Like the film starts just with him like waking up in the woods, and you
Yeah.
follow him, and it's him walking around.
Yeah.
And then he'll like hear a noise, and you follow. Like, to me, that's what makes this interesting.
I mean, I complained about that to you. It's just that we're following this guy with a bad scalp around for
Right. So whether it actually works, or,
Yeah.
and I think to what you're saying, that maybe explains the audience score. But I appreciated the trying to revolutionize
Yes, fair
the
enough.
slasher genre by taking that approach.
Yeah, no, and I there were elements. I mean, I think I mentioned to you when I was watching this, there were some wicked kills in
The
this.
kills are insane. Yeah.
There's one, I mean, I might mention it in the spoiler section, but there's one in particular. I'm just like, oh my, how is that?
Probably think I'm the same one. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the kills kind of put it over the top for me.
Yeah.
I liked those. He had a good. I think there's only one scene where you actually see him from the front when he's playing with that little truck.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty gruesome look. Like they got a great look for
Mhm.
him. Um, I also appreciated that, it's a lame reason for him to be on a rampage.
Anyways,
Anyways,
so yeah, so I think there's trade-offs here. So on the one hand, by following in the footsteps of the killer, I think that it feels very fresh.
yeah,
And it's interesting because it in a way, because you're not connected to the characters and you're not emotionally attached to the characters, it kind of makes you feel a bit more like the killer because
hmm,
I think they do this intentionally. They make the kills so over the top that
yes,
he trains you early on that you're kind of looking forward to them. So like the killer, you have no emotional connection to these people. You kind of want to see them die because you're curious to see what they
yeah,
do with the gore and that kind of psychologically, whereas normally you're like hoping that the victim
yeah,
gets away and you're rooting for the final
yeah,
girl and she'll like fight back and you're kind of rooting for her and you feel horror when her friends are being killed. You're not attached to these characters at all because they're just random teenagers
totally,
that you don't get any connection to. So you're kind of just like, and there's no tension, like they don't film it from the victim's perspective
yeah,
where you're not feeling their fear, you're not feeling their tension, you're not looking around.
yeah,
It's just like, okay, we're following him around. Okay, there's a noise. He walks over. He's going to kill them. There's a bit of tension just waiting for it to happen. But psychologically,
yes.
because you're so detached emotionally, it's just kind of like you're kind of on the killer's side to an extent.
Yeah, I think you articulated that really well. Like I think the idea of the lack of tension because I mean this in a positive way. We don't care about the characters because we don't know enough about them.
Yeah, we're not meant to. Yeah.
So, yeah, and I think you're right. I think that was deliberate. And I like other films like we just did A Quiet Place where we made the opposite criticism. It's like
Mhm.
if you want us to care about these characters, then you have to give us something. They don't give us anything about these characters, which means they're disposable.
Yeah.
And and I think that's a completely valid way to do a film is it doesn't matter. Like we're here to see the killer kill.
Yes.
I mean, as morbid and crazy, but you're a horror film fan too, so that's why you're here. But that's what sometimes you want a Hereditary. Great performances, great
Yes.
story. Sometimes you just want a fun slash fest. And I think that's what this is.
Yeah.
Um, and I do like how you made note of there's way less tension because number one, we don't even see what they're doing. We only see them when they're being killed,
Yeah.
really. I mean, there's the odd, pass by kind of thing. But I, I think I think that in itself makes the film well done.
Yes. It's just so refreshing and
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. It's just different.
So I think that's why, like, for critics, it scored well.
Yes.
Because if you're looking at it just from like a film appreciation standard, you're like, okay, yeah, this is really unique and neat. But if you're used to like, oh yeah, I want to root for the final girl and feel that tension and
Yeah.
that fear of like, where's the killer? And are they gonna get me? And jump scares. And this is just like, okay, I'm gonna meander over here and yeah, okay, I'm gonna kill this guy. And it's almost just like happening and you're watching it. There's no music, there's no
Yeah.
those cinematic tricks that they use to get you invested in that. You're just so detached from it and it's interesting. But maybe is it boring? Like I could see a modern like just a casual audience almost hating this film.
Again, I mean, I know that I'm a broken record when it comes to runtime. I don't think this was too bad.
I didn't know the runtime.
Yeah, I
It
don't.
felt long, I think, because of that.
Yes. And I'm wondering if you had to make it deliberately shorter in order to overcome the the boredom potentially that people might feel
Because there are extended scenes where you are literally situated behind the
just
shoulders
walking around the forest.
and he's just
Yeah,
walking because that's what serial
totally.
killers do. But then he'll hear a noise and he'll like look and then start
Yeah.
walking in that direction. So I just found it really refreshing. I appreciated it. And for a subgenre that's so predicated on formula
Yes.
and every slasher follows the same formula, I applaud them for being
100%.
able to find a way. And that's why I think we love Leslie Vernon.
Yes.
But that's different because it's a mockumentary. It's meant to be comedic.
Yeah.
This actually plays it straight and is able to pull it off, I think.
I think so. Yeah, and I think it's like I feel similarly to you that I do have an appreciation when creators try to subvert the tropes that you're used to. And if we think about movies like Skinamarink or Ennis Main, that have come out in the last couple years, they definitely subvert the tropes, but they're
Yes.
so out there that they're not accessible for the average audience. I mean, as a film critic, or like, I'm not trained in film, so some of the, even for me, and I love film, some of those films are like, whoa, that's just out there for me. Um, but it's a matter of those filmmakers trying to make something different. Whereas what I liked was this filmmaker took something that's within a recognizable genre, has enough recognizable tropes. Like, I mean, if you didn't know any better going into this, you would think it's like a Friday the 13th, right?
Totally. It is
Um,
situated in the woods. Like it
totally.
has that vibe,
Yeah.
but they've just flipped it.
Yeah.
Like, have you
Absolutely.
seen like Clint Eastwood's? Have you seen Flags of Our Fathers or
No,
Letters from Iwo Jima?
no.
Okay, so it's like a war film, two war films that he did about the Battle of Iwo Jima. But Flags of Our Fathers is from the American point of view with
Oh,
American
yeah.
characters. But then Letters from Iwo Jima is Japanese and it's you're on the beaches. So he flips the
Right.
perspective.
Right.
So that's almost what this is doing in a way. And where like every slasher film, you're on the
Yeah.
side of the
Yeah.
victims, but now you're on the side of the killer. And that I can't think of really any examples of that being done other than
No.
something like maybe Leslie Vernon.
Now, did you have any expectations going in?
I knew that that was the premise.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. And I'd seen one trailer,
Okay.
but I had very limited information.
I knew it was getting some buzz, so I had some
Mm,
elevated expectations, and I knew that that was the concept, so I was maybe
okay.
that made a difference too. Like I was mentally prepared
Yes.
to know that I'm gonna just be like following this killer around. Whereas I could see if you went into it expecting a traditional slasher, you might be
Yes.
really caught off guard by like what's happening.
I think that was a little bit where I was coming from, because even the trailer, I think, sets it up as a
And I didn't
traditional.
watch the trailer, so
Okay. And I had seen the trailer once, but I think it does set it up as a traditional slasher style,
yeah.
which is fine to not tell you how they change things. So when I was watching it, and then I did have a little bit of that reaction, was like, oh man, this is so boring. Like watching this scarred head wander around the forest, right?
And I think that's the downside. So when you try to subvert expectations or experiment,
Yeah.
like Skinamarink,
Yeah. As much as I love Lego, that
very
was
hard.
that
The
was
reason that we shoot films the way we do is it's for audience engagement.
yeah.
So when you try to play with those metrics, you probably end up making your film less enjoyable to watch. So you're only really speaking to the people who appreciate the medium enough to like see what
Yeah.
you're doing and appreciate it versus anyone who's watching it for
And that's
entertainment.
the difference in the critic score versus the audience score, because typically the audience has seen a trailer, they have expectations coming in, whereas the critics may have also seen that, but they, as professionals, they have the discipline perhaps to reject what they've seen and focus on, okay, well, how was this made? What are they doing with the tropes?
Yeah.
We know so I think as a critic, you go in and think, okay, that's, I like that. They did something fresh there.
Yeah.
I'm not bored to death about another Jason Voorhees.
Yeah.
Right.
Which reminds me, sorry, this is a funny story. So I was talking to my friend the other day and he hopped online and we're chatting. He's like, oh, I just watched like the worst movie. I was like, oh, what movie was it? He's like, Bone Tomahawk.
That's so good.
I know. I'm like, what? Like Bone Tomahawk is amazing. And he's like, yeah, we like saw Kurt Russell. We wanted to watch a Western. So we put this movie on. And I was like,
Yeah, there's your first mistake.
yeah. And I'm like, no, that's a horror film. He's like, it is? I'm like, yeah, it's a horror film.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, like we just saw Kurt Russell. We saw a Western. So they went into it just expecting to
You
get
think high noon and gunfights and all the rest of it.
but that's kind of to your point, right? So like expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you're like, oh yeah, Kurt Russell Western, let's throw this on. You're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So shout out to Tynan, because that was a pretty funny story. But he's like, this is the worst movie ever, which was so funny because in the horror community, like
Yeah.
Bone Tomahawk, I feel like is almost universally praised. But I could see if you went in
Yeah.
expecting like Wyatt Earp and Tombstone that
Well,
this
because
might be.
I can remember being so excited when I watched that for how different it was, because they're taking those Western tropes and
Yeah.
the expectations of the viewer, and they're really playing with them. And there's some great action and some great kills in that film as well.
Totally.
So yeah, but again, if you're expecting a Western,
Like a John Wayne, yeah,
you
classic
get that,
Western.
you're like, okay, this isn't what I signed up for.
For sure.
Um,
So my biggest critique then, and I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah.
So given that the film's premise is supposed to be we are going to situate you with the killer and you're going to go on this ride from the perspective of the killer, I was disappointed that they break from that a couple of times
Hmm.
and you're not from the perspective of the killer. So there's a scene at the end where you are in a car with
Right.
two other characters.
Yeah.
And there's also a campfire scene where up
Yes.
until that point, I think you're pretty much always with the killer.
Yes.
And I think they do something interesting. They have the camera kind of in the middle rotating between them. So you're never that attached to them.
No.
But I would have preferred them to find creative ways to stick with their premise that they had gone
Hmm.
into, but still maybe manage to. I think they were trying to get a little bit of the flavor of the teenagers.
Yeah, and I am agreeing with you about particularly the end of the film because I found I'm not giving anything away. But I found that end sequence to be too long for me. I think
Yep.
it should have been shorter because it kind of goes on for a while and then it something happens and then like the action stops and they do something and then it kind of tries to, raise the tension, but then it's just kind of over.
Yeah.
And
Because have you seen
it's
1917, World War One film?
no,
So the
it's
premise of 1917 is the whole film is done in one continuous take. So you
oh,
were following the
yeah,
camera around the whole thing. And they managed to do that for the whole film. But if you did that for the first 3 quarters of the film and then just cut to traditional filmmaking, it's like, well, you've just ruined your whole
yeah,
premise, which is to make the whole film look like one continuous shot. So I feel like in this case, it was a similar thing. Like you've put us with the killer the whole time, but now we're in a car with these two characters having a conversation and it's back to like traditional
yeah.
filmmaking. That was disappointing.
But did you think so? What would be, as a filmmaker, what would be your solution for? I can see doing it differently at the end, but what would you posit as a solution for? We need to get something of the teenagers.
Yep. So I would have preferred that they had like an over the shoulder shot or something from the forest line and maybe
Okay,
have like an extended 10 or 15-minute
gotcha,
scene where you just overhear them talking. And
gotcha.
maybe you have a vantage point where you can see most of their faces or something,
Yeah,
but you're still kind
that would
of
have made
like
sense.
detached.
Yeah,
Because then you're still like, it's as if you're like a voyeur standing on the
yeah.
side,
You
like
see it from the
watching
tree
them.
line kind of thing.
But when you're in the middle of the campfire going, that's just not the perspective of the killer
No,
at that point. So I think something like that. And then the car thing, I just probably wouldn't do a car. I don't know how you would do that, but
yeah. I mean, we can talk more about that segment in spoilers.
I agree though that that whole ending sequence is pretty weak.
Yeah.
Like it was almost like a disappointing way to end a
Yes,
film,
I
maybe.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So did you like it?
I did for the most part. Yeah. Again, I think it's one of those films that in the moment where I'm feeling like, oh, well, this is just another Friday the 13th. I wasn't feeling it as much, but in hindsight, it's like, yeah, I did like what they did with this and this. I mean, I think the look of Johnny is really good when you do see him, and that they didn't do too much of it.
Yeah.
So I think that was the plus side of following him around from the back is that you don't get fatigue at looking at his grotesqueries,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the killer or whoever, I feel like you can get fatigue visually about this. He's on the screen too much. I
Mhm.
mean, I think there was a danger of that with Longlegs and Nicolas Cage, where you can't put him on screen too
They
much.
did a really good job of
Yes.
like showing restraint with
And
yeah,
so I think in this case, this is how they did it. He's the central character, but you're behind him.
for sure.
So you don't get to see a lot of the, stuff going on in the front, which I thought was a good way to do it.
So I'm curious to see if they make more of these. I almost feel like you could have this like new wave of slasher heroes with like Art the Clown and Johnny,
Right.
like
Right.
this hyper violent, like kind of new version of slashers that are
Hmm.
kind of refreshing. But I don't think it really lends itself well. I think because the way it ends. But who knows?
Can we go to spoilers so I can talk freely?
We probably could. Yeah. Okay. Should we go to
Okay.
spoilers? Is there anything else?
Yeah. So you're recommending this one, I take it, or are you
See,
cautious?
that's where if you're like a hardcore slasher fan or a hardcore horror fan, I would recommend
Yeah,
this.
that's a
But
good.
I don't think your kind of casual horror goer would like this, or even if you like slashers, this might be so different.
Mhm.
It's kind of like Skinamarink, right? It's like, would you recommend Skinamarink? No, for most people, unless you're really interested
Yeah.
in like the just playing with different cinematic techniques or whatever. So if you're like a diehard, if you're interested in like the way films are made and you appreciate film as a genre or as a medium, I should say, then I'd recommend it. But if you're more like watching horror films just to be entertained, then maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, I agree.
So I really appreciated it, and I think it's a cool idea. But I think the fact that it has a 44% audience score makes sense. I could also see the gore maybe being so over the top that some people were just like, nope.
Yeah. There's one. I don't. Have you ever? We'll get into this in spoilers, but one of the kills, I think it's the same one we're thinking of.
Yes.
Have you seen anything like that
No.
before? Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so.
And that was kind of part of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't like gore, then you should also not watch this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm on board. It's a cautious recommend. I think there will be segments of the audience that really, like that they've done something different, and segments that are like, yeah, but this isn't a slasher film. I signed up for a slasher, like a Freddy or a Jason or whatever.
Not. Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, if you watch enough horror movies, you do appreciate it when they do something different, and you're not like, oh wow, I'm seeing the same film again.
For sure.
Okay, so spoilers.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
Now you can talk about the locket.
Now I can talk. Okay, so what I can say is that I have a hard time seeing how they would do follow-up films unless it was a prequel explaining the backstory. But if the premise of this film is, well, he's been, buried in the ground for 10 years until somebody stole the locket. Well, they're going to steal the locket every time and then have him come out of the grave until he gets the locket back. And
yeah, you can maybe do that one more time, but like, yeah, that's a hard thing to keep doing.
But I mean, I'm probably not the average film goer in the sense of, I think most films should be one-offs.
Yes.
And not have, sequels and prequels, and because it just gets, and I get it. I mean,
but you're really excited for Terrifier 3, right?
I don't know if really excited, but I am excited
Yeah.
To see Terrifier 3, if only to see what kind of crazy gore they throw at us on that one. But yeah, I just think
maybe this idea of like following a killer around is not something you can do sustainably. Like it's a cool experiment to do once. But do you want to watch a whole franchise from just a killer walking through the woods killing people? Maybe not.
Now, did you ever see what's the actress's name? Breslin. She's a younger, I can't just remember her, for Amanda Breslin. No, I don't know what it is. Did you see the movie Final Girl?
Oh, I love Final Girl.
Isn't it Breslin?
I don't remember the name, but
where she's trained to
yes, that movie's awesome.
Okay, yeah, that is so good.
So good.
And I can just, so to me, not exactly the same, but there was an element of this where you see her wandering around. But it's different, of course, because it's not the same premise.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that was a great film.
So I think the biggest thing in terms of spoilers here is the kills.
Oh, so were you thinking about the head through the torso?
Oh yeah, that was messed up.
So I have to. So there's this young woman who's doing yoga or whatever, like on a logging road, which I've never seen. But anyway, she's doing yoga, and this guy ambles up to her with his chains and his hooks or whatever. And I don't think at this point we've seen his face because he's got the
I don't
fireman's
think at that point.
Mask on.
That's
kind
right.
Of thing.
Yeah.
Anyhow, So he's kind of forcing this woman to the edge of a cliff, and she's got nowhere to go. But then not only does I think he puts one of the hooks through her abdomen.
Yes.
And then brings it up to her head, her face.
And then pulls her head forward through the hole of her stomach into like a knot. It's pretty over the top crazy.
So awesome. And then tosses her off the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, like that was like, holy. And I think that's where the film redeems itself a little bit. It's like you have these slow periods where you're just following through the woods, but they do kind of pay
craziness.
off. Yeah. But it's almost so over the top a bit, like we were talking about Art the Clown.
Oh, I mean, you couldn't. It's physiologically impossible to do that, I would think. Right?
That's what almost makes it a bit less.
Yeah.
It's just so over the top that it's ridiculous.
But it was, it gave me a great laugh. So I was really, I appreciated that. But
the one with the saw too.
Yes.
At the end, when he's just putting him on, I don't know what it's called, but that was pretty horrific.
Oh, when he's doing the
like all the different body parts.
Yes. Yeah, where he's doing the log splitter.
The log splitter. Yeah.
Now the ending. So that was my biggest beef, was the ending. So basically, you do have a final girl ending,
Yes.
except she never really has to prove herself.
No.
She's the one that she's in possession of the locket. She's watching him. I don't know if it's her boyfriend or just one of the friends. Anyway, kill this guy. And then she puts the locket on a gas can and kind of walks away. And then she gets picked up hitchhiking.
Yep.
And at first, like, they set it up. So do you remember in Friday the 13th, it's either the first or the second film where you've got that crazy guy in the woods and he picks up somebody and you think they position him that you think he might be the killer.
Yeah.
And so it was similar in this. I knew that the woman who picks her up is not the killer because we've seen him.
For sure.
But I wondered, okay,
she was like a accomplice.
I
thought that too.
Is there a connection? Is she going to stop and he'll be there?
That's what I was expecting.
But again, with due respect, they didn't fall into any of those tropes.
Nope.
But the thing that I don't think they did as well as they could have is that kind of draws out that ending. And you're basically watching these two women drive in a pickup truck on a logging road, one of whom is kind of bleeding out.
Yeah.
And then nothing happens.
Then it cuts to him in the woods and you see the locket.
Yeah.
And
it's gone.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a wow kind of ending.
Yeah. It's very unsatisfying as an ending. Not that, I mean, it would have been cliche to have your final girl have a showdown with this killer. So maybe they're just trying to avoid that. And they definitely had their kill quotient through the film. But it's like, okay, well then just end it right away when she leaves the woods and we know that she's safe. That's what I'd assume.
Yeah, my one counter to that is, I guess, because you're flipping the slasher genre and showing it from the other side, having a showdown with a final girl is sort of part of the DNA of a slasher. And so seeing how they would do that when you're on the killer side might have been interesting.
I agree with you. I just wonder if they got into a position where it's like, okay, we've painted ourselves into a corner.
That's possible.
Not sure how to film this successfully from the killer's perspective.
It would be tough, yeah.
So let's just take the easy way out and have her picked up and taken to hospital kind of thing.
Yeah. I didn't rewatch it. There's some significance though, right, to the story that the driver's telling. Like, is she related to him? It's like his sister, or
I don't know. Yeah, there's something connecting her.
Yeah, I need to go back and rewatch it. So apologies, I don't remember the nature of it, but there's I think the significance of the end of the movie is that whatever story she's telling, she ties into it somehow, the lore of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I agree. A bit of a anticlimactic finish.
Yeah. And so did you read? I didn't do any looking into this film before I went and saw it. So what's the bona fides of the director and those kinds? Like, have they done anything else?
I didn't get too much. The only interesting thing I came across was that so they had filmed 70% of the movie, and then their lead actor got sick or something and couldn't do it, pulled out. So the director's like, okay, well, that's fine because we're just basically just shooting this guy from behind. It doesn't matter.
Oh.
So they went to continue, but like the guy, I guess, walked really differently.
Interesting.
So he was like, okay. So they had to go back and reshoot 70% of the film because the gait and the way this guy walked was different than the original one.
And they couldn't train him to be at least.
I guess not. Although the guy
close?
said selfishly, I think it's a Canadian made film. He wanted to film it in Northern Ontario because when he pictured like what the atmosphere was like, and they didn't shoot it in Ontario the first time. So they relocated to somewhere in Northern Ontario. And that was more like the look that he wanted of the film and to work around this new actor and the way that he walked and stuff. So, so I think it's a Canadian director is what I caught from seeing through the credits, but I didn't get if they had done much before. I think I did maybe look up and he didn't have much of a filmography and nothing that I recognized.
This is completely random. Is that a new shirt?
No.
I don't remember you wearing Follow Your Dreams.
I wore it once before, but slasher, I figure, fits the tone of the episode.
Good idea.
It's pink. I like pink.
No chainsaws in this one, but I thought it was appropriate for this one as well.
So it's interesting. Like it's a hard one to talk about for too long because it's almost so simple.
It's a very simple premise. Yeah, there's not a lot going on.
It's like killer walks from A to B. There's a horrific killing that happens.
And we don't get to see, like, because of the premise, we don't have a lot of backstory or a lot of things going on with the young people.
No, normally you want to establish those characters but there's none of that really. It's just guy wakes up in the woods and here we go. I mean, they do have exposition and
Yes.
and that's where they cheat a few times, I feel like.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean,
get it.
they basically just fill in the backstory for us of what happened with this kid and all the rest of it.
Because I guess the counter argument is if you push too far into like we're gonna stick to the purity of our concept, then you end up with a Skinamarink, which is
Yes.
so inaccessible
Yeah,
and
that's the
so
danger.
boring.
You've got to decide what's important enough that you want to keep your premise going,
Yeah.
and what's less important that you can kind of, throw a bone.
We still want it to be somewhat watchable for
Yes.
an audience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's probably what they were thinking.
Yeah.
And fair enough.
And I think I think probably the reality in most filmmaking is the writer or director or whoever, producer in the old days, might have a concept of what the film's going to be, but depending on the concept, you may run into a situation where it's like, okay, this concept is not viable. How are we
Yes.
going to still finish this film? If you look at, for example, 1942's Cat People, well, it would be very difficult in many of those scenes to film a real panther. So, especially in 1942. So what's their workaround? Well, you show shadows
Mm-hmm.
instead of, and a growl or whatever, but you don't have to show the actual animal.
Yeah.
So I think they did the best that they could. I just think the ending sequence, if that had been clipped, I think it would have been a more successful watch for me.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're kind of building, and then just kind of like
and then it's just like, it just dies a slow death on this, no pun intended, but that's just how it is. Okay, well, I've got a bit of editing to do where I edit out the spoilers that I said early before the spoiler section, but there you go. I love editing, so I don't mind having to edit out more things.
So a cautious recommend if you appreciate
I would say so.
mixing with the formulas, and if you enjoy and appreciate slashers. I enjoyed just the freshness of it.
Yeah, I'd say, if you like slashers and you enjoy the slasher genre and all the tropes that come with it, I think you might have fun with this film and go, oh, they're doing something different.
And the kills deliver.
They do.
So at least on that level,
but if I would argue that if you're a slasher fan who has to have, like, who likes the slasher formula, you may not enjoy the departure from that formula.
Yeah.
Right? That would be my take.
Agreed.
Well, there you go. So cautious recommendation, check it out, stream it. I don't know if it's playing. I streamed it. I don't think it's playing in theaters anymore.
I think it has a very limited theatrical release.
So there you go. That's it for our take on In a Violent Nature. Stay tuned for next episode, and we'll see you in the aisles.